Our church was founded in August of 1991 by Rich McCrae. He founded the church with just 3 other members, 2 people from his singles class at his church, and his mother, Barbara McCrae, who is affectionately known by many people at our church as Miss Mac. They were looking for a place to meet, and Miss Mac worked for Barnett Bank, which is now the Aetna building over by the Avenues Mall. It was a huge auditorium, but it was just him and the 3 of them meeting there in the bank in those first few months. They distributed some 1,500 to 2,000 leaflets inviting people to the church, and somebody even higher up at the bank found out about that and did not like that the church was meeting in their auditorium and said they had 3 months to move. So very soon after their founding, they were going to have to find a new location. Because they had distributed all these leaflets and almost no one had shown any interest in the church, they decided to completely change locations and move to the other side of the bridge. And so the church found a place to meet in a conference room at what used to be the Wilson Inn. It's now a Best Western at 295 and 17. It was at this point that Mike Carroll and his family came to the church, and Mike is fond of saying doubled their membership from 4 to 8 people. One of the things that I find kind of humorous about this is that not only did they rent a conference room in the Wilson Inn, but each week they also rented one of the hotel rooms and used that for the nursery. After several months of meeting at the Wilson Inn, the growing church needed a new location, and we found out that our current property was available for lease by the United Church of Christ. So the church moved here to our current property and began meeting. The next several months and really years were spent pouring a lot of time and money into making this a usable facility. And it was at this point that God really did something amazing that has stuck with some of our original members for a long time. There were several people here at the church one day, and they noticed that there were people out taking soil samples and doing all sorts of measurements on the property. And they went out and asked them what they were doing, and they found out that these people had come from Golden Corral. And Golden Corral intended to purchase our property. The church was trying to figure out what we were going to do, and even one of the members reached out to the management at Golden Corral and said, "Do you realize if you buy this out from under us, you're going to be putting a church out on the street?" And the management of Golden Corral basically said that that wasn't their problem to deal with. And so initially, the church members were a little bit angry about this, and everyone decided we need to go down to the zoning meeting, we need to go down to City Hall, and we need to try to make sure that this doesn't happen. But that Sunday, a message was preached about the proper response to this. And the basic gist of the message was that rather than trying to fight City Hall, rather than trying to create a big stir to try to prevent this from happening, what God's people needed to do was pray. And so the members of this church gathered around this property, they linked arms, they joined hands, and they prayed that if God wanted us to be here, that He would make a way for us to stay. Only one member of the church ended up going to that zoning meeting just to find out what was happening, and when she returned, she reported that so many other people from the neighborhood had gone to that zoning meeting and said that they would rather have a church here in their neighborhood than a restaurant. And so the zoning request was actually turned down, and we were eventually able to purchase this property. That was a formative experience for many of the members of our church going way back several years ago, because they were able to move forward from that point with the firm conviction that God wanted us to be right here where we currently are in Orange Park. Our church has had its share of difficulties and its share of hard times just like any other church. There have been a couple of times in our church's history where our members and our leadership have considered whether we just needed to outright close our doors. There have been times where there have been so few funds in our bank account that we have not known where the money was going to come from to pay the next month of bills. But there have been 4 ladies in our church who have faithfully prayed. Rita Delvo, Miss Sybil, Miss Mack, and Nancy Weller. 2 of those ladies, Miss Sybil and Miss Mack, have since passed away. But I believe that our church has been brought through some difficult times because week in and week out, those 4 ladies gathered together with their plastic notebooks filled with prayer requests and people and our needs. They've gathered together and they prayed. In 2016, as our church began to grow, we realized that we were going to need to build if we were going to accommodate the growth. Our church had already had a building fund, and we had even made plans to build an educational wing on the back of our property. But our growth was significant enough that we realized we were going to have to build larger auditorium space on the front of our property, and so we began praying once again. We prayed that God would provide money through our building fund, and many of our members and attenders of our church faithfully gave to that fund. And yet we still needed more. And so we prayed as we made an application to a foundation that grants money to churches that are doing new buildings. And in 2018, God answered our prayers through this foundation, and we were given a gift of $650,000 to get us started in the building process. Building projects always take longer than you think, and it feels like we have been building these current facilities for several years now, which we have. But thankfully, at the end of 2022, we were able to hold our first service here for our Christmas Eve service. Of course, your first time in a new building is not without its bugs, and we had our share. For those of you who were here with us, you know that the day of that service, our restrooms were not working, and so we had to send people to our restrooms in our old building. But we are thankful that we have finally been able to move into this new facility that God has provided for us and worship the Lord together in it once again. I truly believe the continued existence of our church is a testimony to the faithfulness of God. Jesus promised to build his church, and we recognize that in that promise, Jesus was not promising to build a building. A building is just a tool. But it is a tool to help us accomplish our mission, and our mission is to develop worshipers of Jesus who are growing in the gospel and going with the gospel. In building this facility, we're not just thinking about ourselves and the here and now. We're thinking about our children, and we're thinking about their children and a place for them to worship. We're thinking of a place that is here in Orange Park as an outpost for our city where we trust that people will be saved and discipled and grow to follow Jesus with each passing year. We want to remember God's faithfulness to us in the past. We want to celebrate God's faithfulness to us in the present. And we want to look forward to God's ongoing faithfulness to us